Right. So, feet hip width apart, waist a little bit forwards in your feet, and just turning gently from the middle of your body. I use your warm up. So give yourself a couple of moments to settle in, thinking about your posture, your movement, and just looking to get back to a kind of more Tai Chi-like feel in how you're moving, something that hopefully you'll have a sense for. I'm sure you will. And then just in a way kind of sit back and observe how your body is making the movement. Try and get away from the idea that we're trying to control our body through our mind. There's no point in imposing a way of moving on yourself that doesn't suit where you are right now. That doesn't mean to say that some of the ideas that we have, classic one being the weight just behind the ball of each foot, that's something that we want to move towards, not necessarily something that you're going to be comfortable and be able to move with right now. You can try it, but you don't force yourself to stay in that position. You try it, you come back to where you're comfortable, and maybe a bit later you try it again, and so on and so forth. So the term I like to use for developing in these arts is that we cultivate them. And that process of cultivation requires an awareness of how your body is moving now, how your body is actually doing the task that you've set it. I've talked about this before, this idea of our intent leading our body. And so, the classic thing of intending to go downstairs and get the vacuum cleaner out and go and hoover a room somewhere, and instead finding yourself in the kitchen making a cup of tea, thinking, "Oh, I was going to do some vacuuming. What's going on?" And so on and so forth. Those kind of moments are examples of where there's an unconscious intent that is actually encouraging the body to go a certain way. All we really do in Tai Chi is to take ownership of it, but the intent is not to force the body into a shape, into a way of moving, but to cultivate in the way that we might cultivate a bush in the garden or a plant in a plant pot in the house. To work with the body, because anything imposed on the body, A, can be quite uncomfortable, and B, might not be the right thing. There's a certain wisdom, I think, in your body, even when you're not already doing something like Tai Chi. We kind of know intuitively what's right for us. So we let our attention rest. This image of standing on the hill looking out over the valley, and we just watch, we observe. We have an intent to turn from the center of the body, and we notice when we do that our rib cage moves, and when our rib cage moves, our shoulders move, and followed by the arms. We have an intent to sink, to let the hips drop back, and again we notice what happens on those moments when we're able to do that. And we can start to distinguish. One of the things that will happen when you sink your weight back is there'll be this sense of relief sometimes in, say, your back. And then we can see what happens to the muscles in the back as we move. But another thing that will happen is that your legs will start to ache. You don't want your knees to hurt. So that gives you an idea of what to work on next, shall we say. but that doesn't stop you sort of going, oh, that's a bit tight, I'll shake out and then I'll start again if that's what's going on. We can notice things like, for instance, the inner strength of the body, this mechanism or structure, however you think of it, that supports us from below, from within. And we can start to look at how we can develop that, to grow that within the body, and so on and so forth. There is a time and a place for saying, now I'm going to hold this posture for a little while. But even then, there's a difference between staying in a posture for an extra few moments where it's uncomfortable, and that posture beginning to feel as though it's obstructive in some ways or another. And then raising your arm. In this way, the movements that we make become natural to us. So if you've got the bush in your garden, if you can prune it in the right way, then you shouldn't need to do too much work from year to year, because it knows how to grow. You're just kind of tweaking it, shall we say. So we're not forcing ourselves into anything. Now, just rolling your weight forwards and backwards in your feet. Letting your arms follow. So my hands at the side, and as I go forwards, there's just this little bit of pressure holding my arms back, and then they swing forward, and then when I go back. And this is an interesting example of what I was talking about. You imagine that you're in water, and in the first instance, just imagine you're standing in a river, and the river's pushing you backwards. So you have to make some kind of effort. You have to have the idea that you're going forwards to begin with, and then you just let the motion of the water push you back a little bit. But you stop before that happens, before you get pushed over. And then you go forwards again, and you do that a few times with the idea of the river pushing you backwards and you finding a way, or rather, I suppose in a sense you could argue your body finding the way to move forwards. So how do you do that? Do you have to sort of relax anywhere in particular? Where do you feel the move? And then same idea, but now you have the river pushing you forward, so now you have to find a way to avoid that. And at a certain point, you're going to go back. And you just try and maintain that for as long as it's comfortable, just to keep the focus of your attention on that. But then you imagine the resistance in both directions. And you can move from one aspect of that exercise to another, gradually building up a picture of what happens when you want to move in this way. When you're in a river, and if you're in a river and you're mucking around with some friends and somebody says, come and have a glass of wine, and you decide to get out the river and have a glass of wine, you don't start to walk out the river and say, oh, well, I need to put that foot there, now I need to move that. You just go, oh, I'll have a glass of wine, thanks very much. So your body will respond. And then if you were to do that and couldn't quite get there because of the resistance of the water, you wouldn't stop and think, oh, now I need to relax. You'll just relax and do it most likely. So this is building up a very intuitive approach to movement, combination of, if you like, natural movements, but also an awareness of what we're doing and an ability to use that awareness to just gently steer the body at times. So now, this time, letting your weight settle, your hips going back, hands coming around. And one of the reasons for always starting the same way in a session like this, going through the familiar movements, is so that we can begin to develop that very intuitive quality. Also, so that we notice, this is a familiar movement, we can get some idea. Sometimes you think, oh, yeah, my hips are going back really nicely now, and you get some sense of a physical progression. But also sometimes it's like, oh, that's not quite right. What's going on? Is it the back or the shoulder or whatever? These are the things that I think really cross over into our daily lives. But expanding and contracting. And if it suits you, every now and then, as you push up and the body expands, this is where you might want to take a breath in. You might find that you're doing it anyway, so that's a good example of the process that I'm talking about. We want, ideally, in the long term, to follow a breathing pattern, breathing in as you push up and your body expands, breathing out as you sink down. Chances are you're pretty close to doing that anyway. You might want to just think, oh, yeah, I can do that, but, and then you start to analyze a little bit and you think, oh, yeah, this is, I'm tight here, or this isn't working for me, or whatever. But it's normally the case that when your body gets bigger, you would breathe in at least somewhere, and especially if you've got an idea that you want to breathe in, starting in the belly rather than just up in your chest. And then change into wild goose. So it's curious because this is both a very gentle process, I think, but also one that can feel quite strong in the body, as we know. It can also be one that can be a little bit frustrating because quite often, we notice we're doing something, you're standing there, maybe your foot turned out like that, and oh, my foot's turned out, I'll turn it in, and if that's okay, and then 5 minutes later, it's back there again. These old habits don't necessarily go away. I rather like the image that's associated with sitting meditation of training a puppy. You're trying to train a little puppy. They sit, stay, and then you walk away and turn your back, turn around, and the puppy's gone. And then it's like, okay, we'll do that again. Sit, stay, and so on and so forth. It's not an imposed thing. It's a thing that gradually builds, and then in time, the foot will stay more or less where you want it to go, and so on. And then heart in the clouds. Another thing we become aware of is from movement to movement, from day to day, from week to week, areas that are a bit stiff. Maybe you pulled a muscle, or just a look, you slept on one side and twisted up a little bit, or whatever. And again, we develop a sort of intuitive approach to being able to open up those areas. And again, it's not so very different to how we might normally react. If you were to bump your hand on the corner of a table, you probably shake your hand. And indeed, those kind of shaking movements might be movements that we employ to just release an area, and so on and so forth. Now, changing to dragon pucks, the stars from the sky. And then again, at other times you might think, well, maybe I do need to analyze and to sort of look at a particular way of moving, of standing, or something like that, because if you're getting the consistent tightness in your back or whatever. So none of these approaches are complete in themselves. We need to be able to work with all of them. Do one more of these on each side. And with any of these exercises, you can use those images of being in water, some kind of soft resistance to the movement to help to build that internal strength. Now changing, pushing in 4 directions. Changing now to circling palms. And as always, only if it's comfortable, but you can add the turn. And then switch sides. Notice that if you do add the turn, the back of your body between your hips goes in the opposite direction. I suppose it's fairly obvious, really, but just take note of it, because we want to develop this awareness of the opposite movement, the balancing, the neutralizing movement. It's there in all of the movements. In some of them, of course, it's very significant. And turning, which always has some significance, but some is kind of immediately significant, shall we say. Like the next two exercises we'll be doing after this are examples of that. So rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, it's your hips going backwards. That is the key movement here, because it's that movement that means that you'll be able to go forwards without falling forwards. And then your hips going down will be the movement that enables you to come upwards without straining. One more time. And then come into the upright position again. Just place your hand on the lower part of your back, just where the spine meets the pelvis. And notice what your hand is doing. So you're turning, say, to the right, but that hand is going to the left. And you're turning to the left, your hand is going to the right. So think of somebody just grabbing hold of the top of your back and pulling you from one side to another. And then pulling your hips back. So once again, your head goes forwards and around, and then pushing your hips down so that you come up, and then they're pulling the opposite way. So this is the basic body movement for the exercise, polishing the table. Change direction each time. And this time, the hand is just resting at hip height. And if they were resting on the table, they will be pushed forwards and then drawn back. One more time to each side. Now, hands in front of your shoulders. Push up so your elbows go out. Draw the rib cage back a little bit so the elbows go forwards and sink down. So exaggerated, it's like this and then this. Except that is exaggerated. So a little quieter than that. But we're going to go into bird play. Not bird play, sorry, bear play. Bird play is another one of the sequence. So there is this little bit of a kind of rolling movement, aided by a turn in. So when you go down this time, turn to your left. Feel yourself going over into your right foot and then coming up in the middle and coming over. So you see from the side how the hip goes forward here. A little bit more flexibility perhaps than in some of the exercises. It does mean that you may, I mean, I am exaggerating a bit as well, so you may think, well, the knee seems to be going out of line a little bit. Remember, there is some sort of mileage in the sideways movement for your knees, but not too much. And then what we're going to do is just release the hands. So now your right hand goes out from the shoulder. Notice where it is in front of the leg. So I've turned away from the hand. Again, this is exaggerated, but essentially my hand is moving that way, but my body's moving to the side there. Not nearly as much, but it does actually help to open that up. What hasn't happened is this, the hand coming across. So this area here between chest and arm has just opened up gently. You push up and then. So bear play. Now, going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the class, observing the movement. If you're getting this exercise right, you will feel that little bit of opening and closing in that area between arm and chest, just below the shoulder. And you'll feel other movements as well. So you can begin to build that more into the system through that awareness. So rather than straining to push your arm out, you can think, well, maybe if I just open that area a little bit and then use that to extend the arm or whatever. Observing the movements. Notice that I'm basically facing forward when I'm not turning too far. And I'm still looking forwards here. And upright. Not this. This is the bear in the woods. Strong, but with a certain softness, but probably not that much to worry about in terms of being attacked. So you can afford to stand a little bit tall with this. Do one more to each side. Shake it out. Now, go into a slightly wider stance, and the way to get there, way to sort of measure the width, as it were, is to start with your feet as close together as you can make them, and then you turn each foot out to 45 degrees, so the toes are pointed out, a bit like a kind of ballet dancer, I suppose. But then you push the heels out to 45 degrees, and then you turn the toes out again. And what that should have done is given you this slightly wider stance that we call horse riding stance, or sometimes horse stance, but I think horse riding is more appropriate. This wider stance, rounded across the legs, hips sinking down, and actually in the wider stance, it's possible to think of your pelvis really hanging down. So it's a good stance for getting that feeling. It's also obviously quite strong on the legs, so it's a good leg training stance. And then just transferring your weight from side to side. So we're going to about 60% of the weight in each leg, but we can feel that better as a rule in the wider stance, because when we're hip width, 60% is hardly noticeable sometimes. Whereas here, we have at least got time to register the movement. Move across into your left and turn to your left a little bit, come back into your right and turn. When you turn, try and avoid this locking up of the leg. So the knee will have to turn out slightly as you turn. Same here. So what happens is I turn, and you see that's pulling my knee around, my leg around, the opposite leg. So what I do is I push it out a little bit to correct it. Like you're straddling one of these big blue balls that you get in gyms or something like that. Or indeed on a horse, I guess. And we're going to go into part in the wild horse's mane, appropriately enough, for the stance. But this is going to be the basic movement. You move across and you turn, you move across and you turn. Just holding your hands in front of you so that they can follow the movement. Really letting your hips drop back. You're sitting back here. And when you turn, you're turning towards where the toes are pointing, but you're not going any further than that, or at least not at the moment. If you're really flexible, you might get away with it, but it's not really necessary for this exercise. So now come over into your right foot, and as you push across, imagine you're pushing into something with your shoulder, and as you arrive in the left foot, you turn to the left, like you've pushed into a door, and now there's a gap, and what you're doing is you're turning to feed your hand through the door. And when your hand's here, no further than a line above the leg. So it's almost like arm and leg are a mirror image of each other. It's not quite, that would be the mirror image, and this is straighter. But your elbows above the knee, the hands above the foot, not out here somewhere. You might not be that far, which is fine if you haven't turned that far, but you don't want to turn any further. You come back into your right leg and you turn to the right, and that brings the left hand across, and you turn both hands palm in, well, the bottom hand's already there, as though you're holding the ball. You move back into your left foot, and again you turn to the left. Now you can do the same thing on the other side. You move your weight into the right, so you're pushing into something with the shoulder. You create the space, you feed the hand through, again opening in that area between chest and the upper part of your arm. And as you do, your left hand that's been at the top of the ball, simply goes straight down. And then you come across and turn, and that brings your right hand back above the left hand. You turn them palm in, move across. and then over into the right and turn and start all over again. Part in the wild horse's mane. It's interesting to break the movements down, because what can at first look like quite a complicated movement, and often a movement that is perhaps a little bit going against what I was saying about this idea of this being natural movement or whatever, you begin to realize that actually these are all pretty much everyday movements. But when we string them together in a certain way, with a certain amount of awareness and discipline in how we're moving, then we get this slightly exotic looking pattern. Part in the wild horse's mane. Another challenging thing I think about an exercise like this is to not be too conscious of the arms. You know, the movement is initiated always from the ground. And when we can do that, our arms retain some of that quietness and some of the flow. Common errors with this exercise are here, for instance, you know, you're holding the ball, left hand is palm down, right hand is palm up. Quite often we go through this and we start to turn the hands, and in fact you don't. Here, right hand is palm up, left hand is palm down. You come across still the same, and it's not until you get to here that you rotate the arms and hold the ball again. Another very common error is when we move out of the ball holding position, the top hand goes awry. It maybe comes forwards or something like that, but in fact it goes down to the hip. Imagine you're just stretching out the elastic band between the hands. You feel that opening across your body when you do that. Those of you familiar with the exercise stretching between heaven and earth, it's not so different in feel in the upper body. Another common problem is the one that I tried to talk you out of a few moments ago, which is simply to move the arms too much. If I do that, if I think, well, I want the arm to go right over there, now when I come back, it's like, well, where's the ball? And I've got to start searching for the ball holding position. And everything gets a bit frantic at that point. Whereas if I stick to this idea that my arm is above my leg, my hand is above my foot, as I come back, without even having to move the arm at all, I'm nearly there. I just have to adjust very slightly. Part in the wild horse's mane. One more time. Shake out. Now, right foot forwards. Transferring your weight forwards and backwards. And raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. And then on the other side. And then raising your toes, your heel. And stepping in. And then just taking a few full steps forwards or backwards, depending on where you have the room. And then going back. Okay, thinking about, do pigeon spreads its wings. So hands over your belly, weight in your back foot. And it doesn't really matter which hand is in front, but I generally stick to, if it's my left foot forward, it'll be my left hand in front. And pushing forward from the back foot, like a wave coming out through your body. Pushing first of all your elbows out, feeling the chest open. And the name comes from this slightly bell-chested feel that we get with pigeon spreads. It's really have, you know, that classic shape of the pigeon. And again, this is a good exercise to think about your breathing with it if it suits you to do that, because the expansion travels up through the body very clearly in the way that we want it to for the in-breath. It creates the space for the in-breath. So again, we've noticed something that is happening within the body when you move your arms forwards and when they move up. Even if you're not really connected to the legs, it will tend to open this front part of the body. And so we can add in perhaps the in-breath at that point. We've observed a pattern of movement within the body, and we've just cultivated it a little bit. One more time. And then fisherman cast the net. Again, the natural movement here is you go forwards, your arms swing forwards, you go back, your arms swing back. If we observe that process, so we don't want to move the arms too much to strain in the shoulders or the arms. If you observe that enough, you'll notice what's going on again around chest, between the chest and the top of the arms, in your back, and so on and so forth, as well as, of course, the transfer of the weight. And the cultivation, the intent, if you like, is to develop those smaller movements to feed into what's happening in your arms. And then, having gotten that far, we now change to pushing away, pushing the boat, a clear action, pushing against something quite dense, quite heavy, requiring a little bit of effort, a little bit of focusing of the attention through the image, but never straining, never stiffening. We know that if we try to push against water and we harden up, it just creates resistance. We know that the boat will move through the water if we just apply a constant pressure. One more time. And the shake. And then on the other side, so starting again with pigeon spreads its wings, you start on your back foot, fold your hands over the belly, pushing in, and then, I wouldn't advocate trying to stick rigidly to a breathing pattern, but see if you can just get that sense of your breathing inwards here, the natural response to your body opening, and then see if you can actually build on that, the body opens. So you want to feel the expansion in the belly, in the solar plexus, in the chest, in that order. Or we might imagine our lungs down in the belly, expanding outwards and upwards. We might even go a stage further, and rather than think, well, if I move my arms this way, this happened. We can think, well, if I can build that expansion in the belly and then in the solar plexus and then in the chest, that will start to move my arms. And once my arms are moving, they can move in the shape of pigeon spreads its wings. Or whatever exercise you happen to be doing. One more time. And then fisherman cast a net. And pushing away. One more time. And shake out. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. One shoulder. Side. Your back. And then around your shoulders and your hips. Light on your belly. The upper part of the chest. Remember two bits of feedback I had from students not that long after I started teaching, certainly in the first sort of like 10 years of teaching, probably 5 years of teaching. One was a woman who managed to make a few classes but was moving away, and she said she was really hoping she could find something like this where she was moving to, because she said, I always feel as though this is how we ought to be moving, which I thought was an interesting comment. The other one was a woman who'd suffering enormously with a bad back. She'd had this back problem for years, and she'd gone through all the kind of standard procedures and tried different exercises and physiotherapy and been treated by the doctor and so the whole lot. And she said to me after a few weeks, she said, you know, she said, you're the first person who's ever told me to stand how I feel I ought to be standing. She actually felt that she wanted to do this to take her weight off her back. She felt that that was the right thing to do, but nobody else had ever said to her, why don't you do this? just kind of drop your hips. And I think they're both examples of a sort of almost an innate wisdom within the body. So So I think that's always worth remembering and holding alongside the kind of the instructions and the discipline and so on and so forth. It's not one or the other. We have to find a balance between these things somehow or another. So once again, your feet hip width apart, embrace tiger, return to the mountain. Pushing up. Notice how gravity is already drawing downwards through your body. And so as it becomes appropriate, you just allow yourself to follow that pathway down, settle for a moment, and then once again, embrace tiger, return to now. One more round. Hands down. And shake out. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Are there any questions?